what I really wanted to talk to you about was about kindness. It being World Kindness Day, I wanted to share my thoughts with you to see if any of it resonated and to see if any of this is perhaps getting in the way of some of your own choices at work and at home. Because I think, well, I know that kindness, the word kindness can trigger all sorts of things in people. And we can sometimes witness people holding back. They feel that they aren't allowed to say anything because that wouldn't be kind. And what can happen in those situations is that everybody else has a priority over them. So that everybody else's feelings have a priority over theirs. Everybody else's way of treating them is a priority over them saying, this is not how I'm going to allow myself to be treated. Everybody else's thoughts and rights come first. The other side of that is where a situation arises and we want to say something. We think, oh, gosh, you know, is that going to be kind? And so perhaps we don't do it. And the other trigger is that people, you know, people can get quite angry about this concept of being kind. Why should I be kind? You know, I need to say what needs to be said. And I think there's a little balance between all of those things. So I'm going to touch on those at the moment. And this really came to the forefront of my mind with the posts that we often see come up around kindness. I don't know if you've seen it. You know, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And I think that last bit often confuses people. So I'm just going to go through those three elements and talk to you a little bit about kindness. So the first one, so let's just say you've got something that you want to say, something you want to share. And the first part of that is it true? Now, absolutely, this is where we need to stop and do some fact checking, because quite often we can live our lives through our own filters. We often decide something to be the case with very little information. We assume things about the other person, we assume things about what's happening in that moment in time, perhaps why somebody isn't responding or how they've responded or why they've done something. And this is the first part of that, whether it's at work dealing with a performance issue, whether it's at work dealing with something that somebody has said or done that is causing you anxiety, stress, upset, whatever you want to call it, you know, whether it's in relationships, in your home, in your family, with your friends, out in the world. The first part of this is always going to be, you know, is it true? Let's just take a moment to pause, to breathe, to check the facts. What are our assumptions? What data do we have? How real is this? You know, do we have any evidence to support what we're thinking, what our assumptions are, what we've been triggered by? And it's always going to be a check-in as well with ourselves as to what has triggered us. Okay, so how much of this is ours, how much of this is the behaviors or actions of the other person. So the next part of that is going to be, you know, is it necessary? So I think this could sometimes cause confusion of like, is it necessary? Because we might associate it, as we do with kindness, is, you know, is it necessary because it might upset somebody? Is it kind to say this because it might upset somebody? And we absolutely have responsibility for how we approach something. And I'll come on to that in a little bit in the kindness. So allowing for that, we do have responsibility and we are accountable for how we respond to something. Likewise, we are not responsible for how other people respond. Okay, you can have two people and you can do exactly the same thing to them and say exactly the same in the same way, and they will respond completely differently because their triggers in that moment, in that day, in their life experience are going to be different. How they view it, their filters, their beliefs, everything is going to be different to how they respond. As I say, allowing for how you present it to a large degree. So the question I think around is it necessary is a little bit around what are your intentions behind it, and is it going to add value? Because if, you know, this is our moment of, you know, righteous indignation, okay, we want to rant, we want to make a point, we want to be right, we're angry because we want it to be done our way, you know, this kind of flaring, you know, this, you can feel that, you know, that emotion within you, you can recognize it within you, you know. And it's not to say that if you're angry and you're cross and you're mad and you're frustrated and you feel, you know, those emotions, that doesn't mean that it, you know, you should not do it because it's not necessary, of course. But it's checking in with yourself, it's looking inside and just checking in briefly why it is that you feel that saying this is necessary. Now, if it's adding value, then what does that look like potentially? Well, what it could look like is you have got a concern that you feel is necessary to share to make a difference, to make a change, whether that's a change in the behavior of the other person for this relationship to continue working, whether that's a working relationship, whether that's a performance situation, whether that's a personal relationship. These things need to be shared because these things need to change for you. So that's setting of a boundary, setting an expectation, asserting that some, you know, a behavior or a performance is not acceptable to you. And it is aimed at changing that relationship for the better. So it can be making a change to allow for growth in that individual or growth in the relationship. It's something that's being put out there as either a, you know, it can be a final point. This, you know, this is not okay. This behavior is not okay, and I'm not going to accept it. Or it is a, I'm not happy with this. I'm concerned about this, and there is some discussion around how or what that is, the perception of it, what can come of it, what the solution around it might be. You know, are you seeing this as well? How are you experiencing this? So it really depends on what it is. But the aim of it is very much around, I think, is around what is it that we're saying when we say, is it necessary? Okay. So what is the outcome that we want? And just as I say, checking in to how, you know, the genuineness of that. And I often say with both of these aspects, is when we're checking into the is it necessary, is it true, and is it necessary, it's sometimes it's allowing for that fact check as well. Can be what is our most generous thinking, realistic generous thinking about the situation. Like if we were to think about what's going on at this moment in time for that other person, what could our most generous thinking be? It doesn't necessarily say that we then excuse it. So let's just say that we know that perhaps somebody has got a lot of things on at that moment in time, and they perhaps haven't responded with the best response. We know that usually they respond differently. We can make a decision around that. But what's our most generous thinking about why somebody hasn't done what we feel they ought to have done? Because that's usually where the difference is. We feel they ought to have done something or not done something. And we're measuring against that. Okay, and that comes back to us as our own shoulds that sometimes come into play. And then the last one is, you know, is very much around the kindness point. So you often see, is it kind? And I'm not sure that that's the most helpful way of expressing it. I think the intention is there, and I think if we can connect to it differently, it helps us move things along. Perhaps a better way is to think about it is, has it been, is it said kindly? Can it be said kindly? Because then that moves the responsibility away from, is it kind, is it a nice thing to say? And niceness, you know, I think these days there's some discomfort around the word nice, because the interpretation of it can often be being pleasant, not rocking the boat, you know, being nice, don't say anything that's going to upset anybody, you know, to our own demise, okay, to our detriment. So is it, you know, is it being said kindly? Can check into the, you know, is it necessary a little bit? You know, is it true? Is it necessary? So is it being said kindly, you know, with I think kinder intentions, or intentions of adding value or growth, or setting those boundaries around concern. But it is about being said kindly, because absolutely, and you know, we are going to have annoyances, we are going to have boundaries to set, we are going to have concerns that we want to share and more. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm perfect, because I'm never going to say that. If you've ever heard me speak, I will never say that I get this right 100% of the time. I don't even know that I get it right 80% of the time. I'm human just like you, and emotions can definitely have their space depending on the day. But it is about, as I say, how can we say this more kindly? So this is where our responsibilities come in. The method of communication comes into it. Do we have a phone call? Do we have a face-to-face? Do we send that email? What is what is our method of communication? What is the tone that we use when we say these things? And we need to be very careful with that, because a lot of passive-aggressive behavior can show up whereby somebody says something with a smile or a laugh, but it isn't there. That's a passive-aggressive behavior. But we can use a lightness of tone rather than an aggressive tone. Likewise with our physical language, we can use a more open body language. We can use our eye contact differently, as opposed to sort of that aggressive closed off stance, fists, whatever, scowling that may take place. And our emotional responses are our responsibility. Screaming and shouting, that is out of control. Okay, that is definitely out of control. Now, I'm not saying that nobody's ever going to get triggered to go there, but if that is a reoccurring way, then that genuinely needs to be looked at if you want to have stronger interpersonal relationships and have stronger relationships within yourself. Likewise, if you go to humor, if you go to sarcasm, rather than addressing some of these aspects. But our tone is part of that, and our body language is part of that. So we can choose to use that. The words that we use, the swearing that we use, how we approach it, direct language, questioning language, all of these things are our responsibility, and I think that comes into how we can express things kindly. And as I say, if we're then looking at how to be more productive with what we're sharing, then all of these things factor into it. So I'm curious, what your thoughts are around, how we can express things in a way that means we are asserting our boundaries, we are sharing our concerns, we are trying to create growth in this relationship or this situation. What is your experience? What have you found has worked well for you? And since we're talking about kindness, of course, I'm going to talk about kindness to yourself as well, because the way that we talk to ourselves and the expectations we set of ourselves are rarely in keeping with how we would talk to other people or how we would judge other people. It's not always road judgment, but I am going to stress to you to use today and ongoing to listen to how you are talking to yourself. Because what we say to ourselves, we often believe to be true. And that goes back into the is it true? Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Do that check. Or, is it being said kindly? Do that check-in with yourself, with what you are saying about yourself, and start reframing those conversations with yourselves. And start noticing more of your own triggers, your own conversations, and it will lead from that you will start to notice other people's as well. And with greater sympathy, with greater empathy, with greater understanding of standing in other people's shoes, we genuinely and generally will be kinder in our thinking, kinder in our expressions, kinder in our conversations. But again, we do need to be a little bit careful, because if you are particularly empathetic, sometimes, because we can understand where somebody else is coming from, their pain, their hurt, their trauma, their healing, their wounds, we can sometimes allow that to tip the balance again with not asserting ourselves. So it's always this fun balance that we have in life. So be kind to others, definitely. Random acts of kindness, give into the community, absolutely. Allow for sharing and being assertive and using, the things that I've said about how we can do that in a way that is kinder, but it isn't about not saying things and not speaking the whole truth and not sharing and having those difficult or uncomfortable conversations. And be kind to yourself. Notice your thinking. Allow yourself to make mistakes. Accept that you're human, that you're going to have off days, that you're not going to be perfect any of the time, perhaps. And let that language go. So I'd love to hear from you. Definitely comment below. Share this video if you think that anybody else would love to hear about perhaps their interpretation of kind and how we can look at it in a different way to help our own well-being, how we can approach some of those challenging conversations and become more assertive each and every day. Have a great day. Speak to you later. Bye.